What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We are now on step 12. We've taken a long journey through the 12 steps and relating the 12 steps to emotional sobriety and to self-esteem and what we've called authentic self-esteem. And we're going to continue the discussion of step 12 tonight, and Roger's going to take the lead, and then Herb and I will join him for a discussion. So Roger, welcome and good evening.
Good evening to you and to Herb and to Brian and Declan and Tom Posa, everyone. Thank you for being here at our weekly emotional sobriety workshop. I'd particularly like to thank you, Al, for the opportunity to speak tonight and the opportunities for these past several months to talk about how the 12 steps help build our sense of self-esteem. I also want to thank everyone who's been attending these workshops over the last several months. And thank you for your attendance tonight as well. So we have arrived, as Alan said, at step 12 in our journey through the 12 steps. For my part tonight, I'm going to be talking about step 12 and self-esteem. And I'm also going to be doing some review of how we've talked about the way 12 steps, all of them, impact our sense of self-esteem and self-worth. For the past several months, you've heard us describe how each of the 12 steps of AA helps raise our self-esteem, how it helps us progress to living more consciously, accepting ourselves more as we are, living more responsibly, becoming more able to express and assert ourselves, becoming more purposeful, and functioning with greater integrity. Those are what my mentor in the area of self-esteem, Nathaniel Brandon, talks about as the 6 pillars of self-esteem. And what he means by that are the 6 practices that, when we engage in them regularly, help to build our sense of self-worth and our sense of self-confidence. In the process of describing how the 12 steps help build self-esteem, we've talked about how principles and practices that raise self-esteem simultaneously raise our level of emotional sobriety, which is the overriding theme of our Thursday night workshops. Remember, at the simplest level, self-esteem is the way that we feel about ourselves, which will, of course, vary to some extent from situation to situation, from day to day, even from moment to moment. But at this moment in time, I think we each have some kind of baseline level of self-regard, either positive or negative, or some combination of both, undoubtedly, toward who we are as a person. As Nathaniel Brandon wrote in the introduction to his book called Honoring the Self, of all the judgments we pass in life, none is as important as the one we pass on ourselves. For that judgment touches the very center of our existence. A few pages later, he quoted the famous German poet Goethe, "The greatest evil that can befall a man is that he should come to think ill of himself." We all ask ourselves questions, or perhaps we don't consciously ask them, but we experience them more at an emotional level. Am I worthy of, deserving of love? Am I deserving of happiness and of success as I understand them? Can I trust myself to live with integrity, not every moment, but most of the time? When it comes to self-esteem, when it comes to our individual answers to questions like these, we are all works in progress. Those of you who've been with us through this journey have heard us keep reemphasizing that self-esteem is not all or nothing, black or white, but when we consciously, regularly practice these 6 pillars that Brandon describes, our self-respect and our level of self-confidence will improve, will grow, as will our psychological maturity. With each step, we pointed out how that step contributes to our self-esteem and contributes to our emotional sobriety. Remember the emotional description of emotional sobriety you just heard. The development of real maturity and balance, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. So how does step 12 specifically contribute to our self-esteem? Step 12 reads, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. In the 12 steps and 12 traditions of AA, Bill Wilson wrote that having had a spiritual awakening, the recovering alcoholic, quote, has been granted a gift which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. In a very real sense, he has been transformed because he has laid onto a source of strength, which in one way or another, he had hitherto denied himself. And I want to say that again, because remember the emphasis on powerlessness that we have talked about, on accepting reality as it is, and certainly the concept of powerlessness and its importance in the 12 steps. He has laid onto a source of strength, which in one way or another, he had hitherto denied himself. He finds himself in possession of a degree of honesty, unselfishness, peace of mind, and love, of which he had thought himself quite incapable. What impact do you think experiencing oneself as honest, unselfish, having peace of mind, and loving has on that person's self-esteem, his sense of self-worth? Do you think it elevates those senses for himself? I do. Brandon saw that the development of self-esteem is a spiritual process. In writing about what he termed the 7th pillar, or willingness of self-esteem, at the end of his book, he says that in the long run, he believes that people of high self-esteem generally tend to be happier than people of low self-esteem. No great surprise, right? But in the short term, self-esteem requires the willingness to endure discomfort when that is what one's spiritual growth entails, unquote. We've certainly seen that theme of needing to tolerate discomfort and tolerate uncomfortable truths about ourselves, emphasized throughout the 12 steps. He viewed self-esteem as a genuine and unique spiritual accomplishment. When talking about step 11, I said that in my view, an essential element in authentic humility-based self-esteem is our experience of being of value to others, of easing their suffering and bringing joy to their lives. I see this as a fundamental human emotional need. We do not just want to receive from others, but also to give meaningfully to them. Nothing helps me feel better about myself than giving to another in a way that has meaning and value for him or for her. See how this sentiment is expressed in the 12 and 12. Writing on step 12, Bill Wilson says, even the newest of newcomers finds undreamed rewards as he tries to help his brother alcoholic, the one who is even blinder than he. This is indeed the kind of giving that actually demands nothing. He does not expect his fellow sufferer to pay him or even to love him. And then he discovers that by the divine paradox of this kind of giving, he has found his own reward, whether his brother has yet received anything or not. Practically every AA member declares that no satisfaction has been deeper and no joy greater than in a 12-step job well done. I'm going to say that again. Practically every AA member declares that no satisfaction has been deeper and no joy greater than in a 12th step job well done. Later, expanding beyond the AA community, he wrote, can we bring the same spirit of love and tolerance into our sometimes deranged family lives that we bring into our AA group? Can we actually carry the AA spirit into our daily work? Can we meet our newly formed responsibilities to the world at large? Think about how this orientation of service, of focusing on the other rather than oneself, on giving, impacts each of the 6 pillars of self-esteem I mentioned earlier. I want to add some comments regarding humility, balance, and what we'll call a concept to be named later. Regarding humility, I remind you of Brandon's comments that genuine self-esteem is not comparative or competitive, and arrogance, boastfulness, overestimating of our abilities, putting others down to elevate ourselves, and so on, all of which and many more, I know I have practiced on many occasions in my life. These are not indicators of true self-esteem, but rather of a deficiency in self-esteem. As you have heard us mention, the American Psychological Association defines humility as characterized by a low focus on self, an accurate, meaning not overestimated or underestimated, sense of one's accomplishments and worth, and acknowledgement of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. I'm bringing this up because I want you to consider these modifications to that definition. Authentic humility-based self-esteem, rather than simply humility, is characterized by a low focus on self, an accurate, neither over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishment, worth, strengths, and capabilities as a person, and honest acknowledgement of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. Now, it might seem strange to say that self-esteem involves a low focus on self, but in the way I've come to understand authentic humility-based self-esteem, it's true. It's true because in genuine humility-based self-esteem, we are concerned with finding balance between self-concern and concern for others. As you've heard Tom Rutledge put it in past meetings, humility is reality. It's being realistic about our strengths and our shortcomings So it doesn't involve either false modesty or self-aggrandizing behavior. And I would add something more. True humility, in my view, is an attitude, an inner state of experience one has toward life, toward other people, and toward oneself. It's an accurate sense of one's place in the bigger picture of life and relationships. As Ben Franklin said regarding his own efforts to cultivate humility in his life, I cannot boast of much success in acquiring the reality of this virtue, but I had a good deal of success with regard to the appearance of it. Exactly. For example, as Franklin points out, we can acknowledge our limitations in a reality-based way, but in a way that's still intended to impress others with how humble we are. Or we can humble brag, acknowledging an accomplishment in a way that seems to downplay it, but still brings my good deed, my accomplishment, to others' attention. Who among us has not done these things? I certainly have. I'm in agreement with Franklin. True humility is not simply humble behavior. For me, it's an inner experience of relative egolessness, of relative freedom from the demands of my ego and concern with appearances. And as such, it's an experience, a state of mind and feeling I can only rarely lay claim to. But it is a wonderful feeling of freedom, this humility, when I do experience it. Both emotional sobriety and self-esteem begin with willingness to be as conscious as we can be, which may include trusting our subconscious mind and our intuition at times. Willingness to see what we'd prefer not to see, willingness to face what we would rather not face, and to be as self-accepting toward our experience in the moment and toward ourselves as we can be. This means we need to be willing to know ourselves, to be conscious of our own patterns. We need to know the truth as best we can about who we are. As Brandon said, living consciously is living responsibly toward reality. Living consciously implies respect for the facts of reality. This means the facts of our inner world, our needs, our wants, our emotions, as well as the outer world. But hear this caveat he adds. When we live consciously, we do not confuse the subjective with the objective. We do not imagine that our feelings are an infallible guide to truth, especially the truth of external realities. Remember Alan's description, and I'm paraphrasing here. A major part of what psychological maturity or emotional sobriety involves is learning to act for oneself without being selfish and acting for others without being selfless. It's about finding balance. So if I know my pattern is to be way too focused on others, either in an effort to win their approval so I can feel good about myself, or at least feel less anxiety, right? Or I focus on others in an effort to care for them, but in a way where I'm ignoring concern for my own health and well-being. If I'm doing those things, I need to move my balance point in the direction of healthier self-care, increased self-focus. Note I say healthier self-care, not excessive self-centeredness, okay? If, on the other hand, I know from feedback I've gotten from others and from occasionally seeing through my own blind spots that I am far too self-focused and self-centered in my life, seeing others primarily as means to my own ends and demonstrating little or no genuine concern for them, then the direction of my attention and my energy and my actions needs to go outward toward others, toward concern for them, toward service. The philosophical maxim, know thyself, applies to these ideas about emotional sobriety. I want to leave you with one last concept as I check the time. Oops. In our discussion of self-esteem and the 12 steps, when I am excessively self-focused and self-absorbed, either with self-criticism or with self-aggrandizement, meaning either with devaluing or overvaluing myself, right? I find this to be very helpful. For our purposes here tonight, we'll call this food for thought, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. A Buddhist monk from Vietnam named Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away in 2022, had a powerful concept he called interbeing. Interbeing. We all use the term being, right? Alan likes to point out that we are referred to as human beings, not human doings, particularly to someone relying on workaholism too much for his or her sense of self-worth. We have an experience we call being when sitting quietly meditating or praying or walking quietly in nature, perhaps. Paul McCartney sang about the importance of being in Let It Be. But what the heck is interbeing? Well, you see the apple, right? A discrete object, separate and whole unto itself, just as we appear to be discrete beings, separate and whole unto ourselves. So what is central to this apple? What is contained in this apple? Well, there's a stem, there's a skin, there's the pulp or the flesh, there are seeds, there are vitamins and minerals, vitamin C, potassium, numerous other minerals. There's fiber, and we could go on. But Thich Nhat Hanh asked us to look deeply into this apple. He asked us to be aware, to consider all that is contained within this apple, all the conditions that were necessary for its creation. Think about that for a few moments. What conditions were necessary for the creation of this? One condition is an apple tree, right? And what are the necessary conditions for an apple tree? Well, soil is needed for the apple seed to take root, and not just any soil, but soil with the necessary nutrients and elements, the necessary moisture, the necessary temperature, and so on. Soil that allows the apple seed to not only grow, but for the mature tree to continue to live. And what else is needed? What else is contained in this apple? Sunlight, right? And the correct air temperature range, and oxygen, and other elements in the atmosphere. Oh yes, and no lightning strikes, please. And what about people? People to harvest the apples, and trucks to transport the apples in, and we could go on, right? So in Thich Nhat Hanh's view, when he sees an apple, he sees the sun and all that it's composed of. He sees the atmosphere and the sky and the clouds that create the rain that the apple is going to need to grow. He sees everything that was needed, and the list is obviously endless, right? For this apple to mature. So he did not see the apple as being separate from everything it needed in order to come into existence and to continue existing. He saw its existence as interbeing, not as being. He saw its interconnectedness to everything else. I'm going to say that again. Its interdependence, its interconnectedness to everything else. So how does this idea apply to each of us and to step 12 and to self-esteem? Well, what conditions were necessary for each of us to come into existence, and our parents before us and their parents before them? What conditions are necessary for each of us to sustain our lives physically, psychologically, social, relationally, spiritually? Mind-boggling, right? To even begin to think about that. But even a very superficial understanding, which is certainly all that I have, of this idea is very helpful to me. Because for me, when I'm venturing too far in the direction of self-importance, as we have said, both differentiation and autonomy are absolutely necessary for our psychological maturation, for self-esteem, and for emotional sobriety. Moving from extreme dependency to increased autonomy is essential for our development, as we have emphasized. But we have also emphasized, once again, we are not islands unto ourselves. It's about balance. When I'm overbalanced towards self-concern, this concept of interbeing helps me reorient myself toward a deeper reality, towards seeing that I am a very small part of a very large picture. And that when I focus on service, service to what is healthy and is needed by life, by the situation I'm in, by other people, and yes, even for myself, my life gets better and I have higher self-esteem. So I frequently remind myself about interbeing, the profound, mysterious, and infinitely complex interdependence of human beings with one another, and with all that exists to everything else that exists. Clearly, an emphasis on service to others, as described in step 12, fits very nicely with this concept of connectedness and interbeing. To summarize, I believe that when we focus on surrendering to and serving reality, we raise our self-esteem. When our goal is to serve life and situations in our lives in ways that include ourselves, include others, and include the larger environment we are in, we are growing our self-esteem. When we strive to help ourselves and others live more freely and more joyfully, we are growing our self-esteem. And as you've heard me say before, I often fail in these goals, but that focus on balance and on service keeps helping me find my way. Thank you all for your attention.
Wonderful, Roger. Let me get the rest of the team in here.
Herb, why don't you take a shot at that, and then that's a mouthful. I feel like
I need 3 hours. That was wonderful, very dense and intense. Roger, thank you so much for that. I made 5 pages of notes actually, and just thoughts that came to me in terms of my own journey. And I want to just keep it really simple in terms of the experiential part of what happens. And the image I have is the dimmer switch. It's my favorite image that I was in darkness and I didn't know it. I met a man who had something I didn't recognize, but it exuded from him, and he was like a magnetic power. I went to him. I could not have not gone to him after the meeting. He shared only for 5 minutes. And I said, tell me about who you are and how you got what you talked about, because there was something that had connected to me. After we had about a 45-minute discussion, the discussion went on for an hour and a half. But after about, because he asked me a lot of questions about me, he said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have no transformation.
Yeah.
I'm 48 years old at that time, 4 years sober. And I had an extensive background. Just to recap it, though, my tradition is Catholicism in a very healthy way, all through the schools of grammar and high school. The principle was to love God and help other people, and I knew that. And I wanted to be a decent human being. I wasn't, but I wanted to be a decent human being, and I knew the truth. And I knew it was correct. I went in to become a priest for 7 years because I wanted to, and it's all corrupt because I didn't know that I didn't know, and I wanted the collar for power and prestige and whatever else, and I left because I didn't find it. I then entered into a serious study of psychology, attempting to be trained and become one. Because actually I was attracted by the theory of human development and personalities, but I also wanted the money and the prestige that went with it, as I saw it at that time. And then I was in business, and still with these principles of good, solid philosophy and theology and psychology. And I found I was, and I did the corporate thing, and all of that was never about helping, but I didn't know that. It was all about me in a very narcissistic way that had really developed without any awareness of it. And then I come into AA and completely collapsed in absolute embarrassment and humility, and did the drill. And he said, my sponsor, go to meetings 10 minutes early, stay after the meeting 10 minutes, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying that because he told me to do things that I wouldn't have done, contrary actions. I didn't want to give up my time. I didn't want to help other people, but he said, this is part of the deal. So I took from the outside some operating direction, and I began to act that way without any interior connection to it. And then I did these steps with this man. And over the next 10 years, I did the steps, the same process, the same steps with 3 different people having 3 different experiences. And at the end of that process, and here's the punchline, I cannot not help people. All right. I became very conscious of the false self and had dismantled that through not only through the step process, but through professional help and lots of outside work, and continued doing the drill from the quote, this is service, you know, and from the outside being motivated. Lots of reasons there, but finally from the inside, I'm seeing step 11 as like I'm a lantern. That's my favorite current image of it. I have become a lantern. I'm not the light, major revelation. I'm the lantern, and I want to improve the light in the lantern and keep the lens clear. But I also want to be on the side of the road where people are walking so that they can walk the path in the light of my experience and have their own experience. And that's the step 12. As a result of that entire journey from just the hardcore narcissist as a adult at around 48 years old, having a turn over a 10-year period, gradually turning. And that's the commitment in step 3, to turn from my self-centeredness to be turned to other-centeredness. Yes, I participated in it. I thought about it. I made decisions based on it. I took actions based on it. But the spiritual math is, I can't get here from there. And yet here I am, given an experience disproportionately impactful than my contribution to it. That's that's my sense of what we're all talking about here. The point, though, is to take contrary actions in the beginning as if what they're telling me is true, eventually finding out that I organically have that metamorphosis like the caterpillar to the butterfly. Thanks.
Thank you, Herb, very much. Yeah.
Ellen?
Yeah, Roger, you and I have talked about this idea of interbeing before, right? And how he connects everything. And it's a powerful, powerful concept. And, one of the things that just reminds me of is that, step 11 was the beginning of expanding our consciousness, right? Continue to pray and acknowledge his will for us and the power to carry that out. And this step is another step towards that expansion. And what this step is really doing is saying, take all the work that you've done and integrate this work into your life and into your relationship with everyone. See, that's what we're invited to do. And integration, and Bill really captures it, and I'm going to be focusing on this a lot when I talk next week. Integration is such an essential part of development and of growth. Without integration, we're not who we are today. It doesn't happen. If you don't integrate your experiences into knowledge and into wisdom, then you're not going to be growing and developing. When we fall as an infant, when we're learning how to walk, every time we fall, we integrate the information from that fall to get into our cerebral cortex and other, neural pathways to try to figure out how to stand up and do this thing better. And it's through the process of integration that we learn to walk. It's through the process of integration that we learn to speak. It's through the process of integration that we start to learn how to cope with life and to deal with life. So this whole journey has been towards integrating this best possible way of thinking about our problems, the best possible way of thinking about our relationship with ourselves, the best possible way of thinking our relationship with others, and the best possible way of being connected to the God of our understanding, or to our higher power as we understand it. So it's such an important step because it brings it all together. Right? It's like the conclusion, even though it's just the beginning. It's weird. It's a conclusion. And once again, we talk about paradoxes. We were introduced to the paradox in the first step. And here we are now with step 12 with another paradox, right? It's the conclusion of all our work, but it's just the beginning of all our work. It's now integrating everything we've learned, right, into now being able to show up in a very different way. Now, when we tie this into emotional sobriety, which Bill said, if we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to find emotional sobriety. What this means in terms of emotional sobriety is freedom and autonomy. That's what this means. Bill called it a true independence of spirit. I like to think of it more as this emotional autonomy, or if we think about it in terms of differentiation, a high level of differentiation. Because when we reach a high level of differentiation, we learn to act for ourselves without impinging on the rights of others. I'll say that again. When we reach a high level of differentiation, we learn to act for ourselves without impinging on the rights of others. So this is an incredible journey that we've been taking. And you can see on how, if I'm able to function that way, now my reputation with myself starts to improve. now my experience of myself starts to improve. I see myself moving through the world with a sense of confidence that I can face and deal with life as it is. I don't need the world to be what I want it to be okay, even though sometimes it may take a hot minute to get there. As you know, Roger, with what I'm going through in my personal life, that doesn't, I wish I could just snap my finger and be there right now. But you and Herb are spending a lot of time with me, helping me find that path. Herb's got that lantern out and he's standing there with it. And so are you, Raj. And that's what this is about for me, is to reach that place of emotional sobriety. And with that comes a whole different experience of ourselves. With that comes authentic self-esteem that's grounded in humility.
That integration, and I would like to make a comment on it, because yes, absolutely. It comes from the practice of action based on principles. That's like even the toddler is practicing walking, even though it's falling most of the time. So there's an action there that they're integrating their experience. And that was absolutely my experience with it. So not only is it a high level of differentiation, in the sense of my learning, but it's a high level of a sense of unity. And that's the balance that Roger was talking about. And you talked about originally when you gave me that Fromm quote.
Yeah.
About the individual as well as the connection and relationship to others.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Yeah, Fromm defined mature love as union with the preservation of integrity.
And that's the differentiation and the unity realization of our community.
That's right on.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. And community is a good word for this, isn't it?
It is.
That gets to what Roger was talking about.
Yep.
Right?
That's the balance.
That's the balance.
Yeah.
So we only have I invited you to come in, Brian, because I wanted, since Tom's not here tonight, I thought maybe you'd like to reflect for a few minutes on this. And then because we're gone late today, we probably won't have much time for shares, but I'd sure like to hear what your thoughts are about what Roger was saying and with where things are at in your life at this point.
I something came up work related and I was focusing on that. So I don't have anything meaningful to contribute on topic.
Do you have something that would not be meaningful to contribute on?
Oh yeah, lots of stuff.
There's room for that as well. Listen, man, we don't need to be perfectionists at all in this thing. So if there's something that would be non-meaningful, I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, I would say there's something happening right now related to the baby that isn't connected to the topic, that is meaningful, that isn't what you asked for, but that's what's been on my mind a lot recently. And I mean, I could throw that out there. It's something.
Go right ahead, man. If that would be helpful for you.
Yeah. Essentially, we are getting some feedback from the doctors that the baby is pretty large. And I've heard the scans can be inaccurate, but most people that said that have only gotten femur measurements, and our baby's gotten head circumference, chest circumference, femurs, all of these different things. And they're saying like 97th percentile for weight and size. And so basically we're sort of getting pushed to, or the recommendation is to induce early, to try to minimize the size and the damage to Floor's body. And we have to make a choice coming up here pretty soon to either do that or not. And it's also coupled with Floor's mom had a stillbirth, a full-term stillbirth when as their first kid. And so there's sort of this fear and anxiety about family history of stuff like that, waiting too long, or mom never went into labor. And so and on the other hand, the inducing, I heard another story where my brother, his girlfriend, her sister just had a baby, and they were saying the same thing. Baby was born and it was 6 pounds. They were projecting over 9 pounds. And so, I've just been really struggling with, Thor and I talking, trying to figure out what to do, because the choice is coming up, and I don't know how to take all the information into consideration. And I guess there's like a control piece to it all too, of like, I want to try to, you know, if I make the right choice, then everything will go okay, and then I'll feel better about it. And I guess I didn't realize that I'm kind of scared. And actually,
I've always found in a dilemma of this kind to go to a research hospital for a second opinion. If you're not doing that, I would really seriously recommend it. The research hospitals are much more current, cutting edge than the local people, who are wonderful handling regular stuff. But
yeah, this one's at Cedars. So, you know, I'm not sure if I think they're a research hospital, but they're pretty
Yeah, they're pretty good.
They're pretty good. So, but I'll look into
Yeah.
that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just really, you know, I think Roger, you said it, you know, you said it to Flora and I when we first told you Flora was pregnant, as you said, get ready for the anxiety. And I understand that more and more all the time.
Yeah.
And it just adds a whole nother layer of it when you're making choices for somebody else that can't make choices and trying to figure out the right thing to do. And it's just scary. I'm just trying to do the right thing, and I don't know what it is, and it's really hard.
That's right. That's it. It's really, really hard. And for me, it was really, really scary. I tell people that being a parent is the most challenging, the most rewarding, and the most frightening part of my life. And I could go on. Okay, it's all of those things. I feel for you, and for Flora, and for your baby to be, Brian, because it's a tough. I know you. I know you're getting all the information you can about risks, right, and benefits. I mean, that's one thing clearly to do, but it's such a personal decision, man. And I sure don't know what you need to do, but I think in terms of the process, man, just to leave no stone unturned, so that you can look back on your process of the decision making, and Flora as well, and go, I gave it the best I had to give, man, in terms of getting the information I needed and getting the opinions I needed. I did the best I could possibly do. Flora and I together did, with making this decision. I thought you were going to say that they were recommending a cesarean section.
Yeah, they try to avoid doing that at all costs. So they'd rather try to induce early rather than go that direction.
No, I hear you. My mind was on the wrong track for a little bit when you were talking about the possible size of the baby. Anyway, I can be a good listener, Brian, so don't hesitate.
I'll probably take you up on that.
Brian, there are OBGYNs that specialize in high risk birth. And that would be the consultation I'd recommend at this point in time.
That's a good idea.
I would find a high risk OBGYN and get.
I'm going to look into that tonight and maybe try to make some calls tomorrow.
That would be the next move, because that's the person that's going to be up on all of the latest information in terms of a situation like you're facing. And look, all you can do is right at this point in time is follow that path and see where it takes you, right? And then you'll have more information to make a more informed decision. But Herb's right, you can't base this just on one opinion at this point in time. It's too big of a deal. But
yeah, it's been 3 different doctors.
Okay, within the Cedar system.
No, different systems.
Okay.
Different systems.
Okay.
So, but they're not high risk specialists. So that's, I think, which is essentially what you're saying. You're both saying the same thing in different ways.
Right.
Find someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Well, all of them know what they're talking about. It's just a high risk doctor is treated more cases like this.
Yeah.
All of them may have treated a few, but a high risk doctor's probably had hundreds of cases like this. That's the difference.
And they've seen what happens and what to anticipate.
Well, that's why I would get that person on the.
I think that's a great idea. I didn't think of that.
To get some information from him. Okay, well, Tom, let's bring you in and let's close out the meeting for tonight. And we'll all say a prayer for Brian and Flora and the baby.
Yeah, and Brian, I just I was in therapy and in recovery 10 years before we got pregnant, and my therapist goes, "It's going to bring up some stuff for you." Like, yeah, you think?
Understatement of the century.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just want to note that we have a Facebook group, and that link I'll put again in the chat. You're welcome to join, and if you want to start a conversation about the topics we discussed this evening, it's the meeting after the meeting, and Carol Carter is going to be there helping us out with that as well.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.